It's just a moment to really kind of honor and respect the work that was done to bring us all here together. So a very, very, very warm welcome from South Africa. We are joining online, but we're also joining and being welcomed by Siviwe James and in your home, your lovely guests at home, and hopefully we'll get to know them through this session. Why we are here as the Global Fashioning Assembly 2024 is where we started 2 years ago, exactly in October 2 years ago, as the Research Collective for Decoloniality and Fashion, and other collectives around the world really sort of questioning where do we come together, where do we meet when we learn about fashion. So this questioning of the conference, the questioning of how a conference is put together and who gets to speak or who gets to participate in these global conferences. So 2 years ago, we created the first Global Fashioning Assembly where we had people from around the world join us in hosting this conference of fashion. And so in this year, we're very excited that we have got more people and more countries and more hosts joining us. And so the whole month of October is really dedicated to this coming to meet others who carry fashion knowledge. And so I'm very, very proud to introduce Siviwe James that will be hosting our session today and hosting us as local participants in person, but also as global participants online. Siviwe James joined the African Fashion Research Institute shortly after the African Fashion Research Institute was founded, so it was around 2020. That Siviwe started to work with us and really bringing a kind of critical thinking about what it means to think about fashion, not only in a material level, but in a much deeper social and cultural level. And what does it mean to bring these histories forward? So Siviwe, we are here to listen to you, and that you can share with us some of the work that you've been doing that has brought us to this moment. I think it's an exciting moment for you and for the podcast that you're working on. Thank you so much.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Me and uMam Jafta from my mother's lounge in East London. It's a pity the laptop lighting's horrible. You'd be watching all this burgundy in the background. But thank you for joining us today. It was a bit of an anxiety build up to today, trying to get everything done. And there's been a lot of questioning on what today is going to do. This idea of arriving with a finished product, but also what does it mean to not have a finished product and maybe to have something that's still in process, and what does the space actually offer work and offer us as those who are sitting in, but also those who are hosting the sessions. So today is I've called it a rehearsal, because I think the word itself makes the space and what will come from today just feel less daunting and feel a lot more open and giving, which I think is what we need, not just for my session, but I think for all the sessions. We need the spaces to be giving, to be generous, to be open to what we have to share and to the voices that will be speaking. So just a brief outline on why you are all here today, why uMam Jafta is here today with me. So Unfolding, Refolded, Folding, Folded, Imiphindo kwaXhosa was a podcast that I set up last year through The Fold, which is an interdisciplinary multimedia project which was supported by Creative Nestlings and curated by AFRI and British Council as a part of the New Narratives Commission. And so we set up to do these different interventions, mine being a podcast. And this podcast journey started off by exploring dress sensibilities, kwaXhosa. I was looking at how do Xhosa fashions come to inform, encourage and affirm our space, our sense of value, and what does it do in order to encourage language, a sense of community, and all the other nuances that are found in Xhosa culture. This podcast last year, I produced it with my good friend and curator and thinker, Sihle Sogaula, who is here with us today, as well as Bongani, who is going to join us a little bit later. And with the three of us, as well as the broader community that was co-writing with me or co-authoring with me, we pulled together a listening project that acts as a research tool. It becomes a bit of a holding space for us as amaXhosa, firstly, but then also I think for Black histories, and just in general, I think for anyone who's looking to locate an alternative self or locate themselves within the contemporary. I think the podcast then becomes this room that you get to sit in every so often. So through the podcast, this digital site became a place where the story never ends. It became about a truer reflection of histories that speak of resistance and re-existence, community and reconciliation, justice and allyship in many different ways. Through the podcast, in our first season, we asked what happens when we begin to collect from our own stories from the everyday. How does collecting the everyday fill the historical voids with presence? And presence is a beautiful, I'm going to call it a concept that Sihle threw in my way, and I'd love for her to touch on it a little bit later on when we dabbled in this idea of what presence means versus visibility. And then the podcast as well, it acts as a wayfinder on how we begin to address what it might mean to decolonize the act of archiving, how the fringe can become the most humbling place from which we are able to restore the spirit, our thinking, and realities. And so with today's session, I'm essentially announcing a new season of stories. They're not the typical fashion stories, and this was a bit of a back and forth that was had. What does it mean to present a fashion story, and how can we maybe think differently around what is a fashion story? So as well, the stories that we'll be sharing don't necessarily look at dress. We have dressed bodies that I feel fashion the story that is told. But it is not your typical idea of what is a fashion story being told. Today, we invite you all as our global audience to sit with us in this contemplative, reflective space that we've created. This rehearsal session will capture strands of the ongoing research that I'm currently doing, and it will kind of like lay the foundation for the other episodes that will still come from this session of recordings. I'm considering this as a bit of a soundboard session, something that would normally happen with a voice note to Sihle or a voice note to Erica, but this time around, there's no one singular voice note. This will be the voice note session that we all have together. And so on a broader scale, we are looking at what are the bigger and deeper histories that we have in South Africa, in the Eastern Cape. What do they make manifest in the present, and how do they continue to be held in the many folds found kwaXhosa? Namhlanje sizobiyela amabali ethu, a collective story, one that accounts for another possible future and truths that have not been heard from. Through the Jafta family, which has really opened itself up to me, as well as the community of Lurwayizo and Willow Vale, we come to understand and encounter a broader telling of a community that has been through affliction, of disturbed rituals, of segmented families, but also of a community that has found new ways to exist and new ways to honor themselves and the complexity of history that surrounds them. We will explore ilali as living libraries, memorial sites, the role of creative practice as lalini as gestures for inciting compassionate memory work, and how participatory engagement with ilali or sites located on the outskirts of the contemporary can yield new authors, inciting new knowledge sites, whilst highlighting the value of rural areas as local memorial homes for our collective memory. So with that being said, we will open up to our first viewings. And then once we've watched the episodes at about 2 o'clock, hopefully, we will break for about 10 minutes. And when we come back from our break, we will have our reflections and we'll open up with Sihle at that point. And then finally, at about 3 to 4, we will have the sharing council. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please sit back. I'm going to ask our amazing tech support, that is Svetlana, who has been doing such an incredible job with me as we prepare. I'm going to ask her to play the first episode, which was titled Yibiyele.
And
you are so brilliant. The way you can just finish Izamba.
I'm sorry, guys.
Yo,
I don't play.
who give that? Sani.
And zethu ziphelile.
And uThixo makancede andizazi baziphi. Since my teens I bought Izamba zange ndayigqiba. It's a story on its own. I'm so bad. Like ndisalilela i-lipstick sami ndithi hey bila bag ne-lipstick yami wa-esti bethuna u-esti ndandimthengile. Oh my lord. Hayi zayikhupha ngenaliti asisi. Yo bamba zange asisi.
And lisazawalide ixesha before ndiyothenga enye, guys. Ngabeni.
I hand it to you. Trophy yakho. But anyway.
So.
Oh, there goes the store.
Oh yes, thank you, Zayas.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, does it make sense though? Like this.
I'm getting it. Yeah, I'm getting it, but I need with concerns of money, material, people, the earth, everything. There's plenty for all of us. There's no one who can really hijack a story.
Yeah.
Because I'm ibelief yami ke le ndayifunda ndimncinci ndayifundiswa ngu-teacher wami. What wandifundisa about that book, The Prophet, who says uGandhi, her brilliance needed uba iphume kuwe. Beyond that, you can boast to all your friends and everything, but she has her life coming through. Like your life, like you and my relationship with you. Based on that day, you and your mom and I were sitting there. And umama wakho wayifaka engqondweni yoba you will meet ke uPhumla phaya. And when I understand ba hayi lo Phumla uspecial because umama xa ithetha kanje uthetha ngomuntu omthandayo laa nto le vibe ndiyifumanayo yabo, you understand. So ke I always believe that it's all connected. Battle of Lurwayizo une elements of sadness in it. And the reality is that we are in the process of getting an IP lawyer ozasenzela, so that whenever this name is used, it's protected. I'll tell you why. Well, sithetha ngabantu bakwaJafta. Abantu bakwaJafta have kind of surfaced and been self-maintaining. Ukenny, by virtue of his birth, he can't go away. Chris wanted him to join the army in India to train. And he said, please do this for what you've done. Ukenny wafika ezinkampini. Kulanjwa, inqabile inyama, wacela amantshontsho ehhagu some place, and he started a big pigsty and fed the big men and the small men in that army right up to Lusaka. He's that type of person. So ke ngoku battle of Lurwayizo ehle ebantwini who can, who've got the means, intellectually and otherwise. But there are other families involved. Kukhona the Ngono family. Abamazi unyana wabo uphi. And zonke zazinto pha kubo. Yabona? So whatever we do, whenever we use el gama, we've got to be mindful of Bantu. And we've got to be mindful of the fact that they have been totally forgotten. In terms of in ikhaya, in terms of in indlu yakowabo, in terms of his siblings, in terms of in nephews, because you're not record yoba wayinomntana or anything like that. So I've got to come in and say, put brakes and say, by the way, we can do these things, but think of the Maqhekeza family. Nyana wabo was already qualified as a magistrate, or near being a magistrate. These days he would be maybe in the Constitutional Court. But uMamake died in poverty. And izinto zakowabo azenzeki as
they should.
As ngolahlobo yena beyenzele ANC. And then within this thing, kukhona family zosoli, kukhona ifamily zomafu, kukhona ifamily the other gentleman ufana, you know, the other comrades involved. So when we talk a battle of Lurwayizo, kufuneka siyicreate
Low context.
ibiyelwe ingabi nampoxo and ingabuyeli kuthi to say like, because the MK people also hold ownership. Well, look, we did this voluntarily. There are people who gave their lives.
Yeah.
And kulo mtya uza eLurwayizo, we've got to be mindful and respectful of abo bantu. So it doesn't become a me, mine, and.
So, yeah, I'm glad I actually came. Now. So when I think of Lanto Sasi's Besikuyo at the start of the year, and even my first visit with uTatu, it's these details that really begin to make the activity part make sense. It begins to also say, and I think that's where you're going, Ukuba, the Battle of Lurwayizo noba yenzeka on the Jafta property. It is not a Jafta event.
No.
It's
not a Jafta event.
It's not a Jafta
Definitely
event.
It's not.
It is uJafta who is able to bring light back to the situation again. Because I think even when I Googled it for the first time, like you really get a few articles that maybe mention it. And it, because ayikho umuntu angavele azamframe uTata then as the main face, the main everything kulento,
which is not true.
Ulahlekelwe ke ngoku ngabanye.
Ulahlekelwe, the story. Many years ago, I read on the newspaper an Irish guy It was futhi le nto yosikutyhila into laa nto ndayityhila e-waiting room loo ndayityhila phi uthetha nge-era which is the Irish Republican Army and the great things that they did trying to fight and the bloodshed and nyani ke they were the daily horror back in the 70s and 80s and then in the end he talks about abantu be-MK, but in such a derogatory way. And then I just think, I want to get it's a story, say, Battle of Lurwayizo, will reawaken nezinye. Because we still don't understand the value of the freedom that we have. The way nje esike senze ngayo and the way some of the comrades have run the country. So I believe uba if nje abantu nje bangakhe ba-understand bangahoyi into yobu-celebrity.
But also laa nto ethi by visiting with ilali itself and however that's going to materialize, you know, whether singahlala nomntu othile who was also around during the time but who will speak from a different perspective, I think that also changes la framing eyenza but it's a Jafta project and it begins to become the Lali's project.
Yes.
Because that's what you're saying. It's what's happened here wasn't just a story about uJafta. There are so many other personal histories that were impacted and continue to be impacted today by ukulahlekelwa ngabantu eLurwayizo and ukulahlekelwa ngabantu during the apartheid, because that's essentially what it frames is the extent of the apartheid outside of the cities. uTatu Mayapi, when we were driving here, he explained to me how he knew any sort of disruption to apartheid would come to ilali quite late in comparison to the cities, and indlela that they as young men would get fired up besiva ngezi zinto nabo bezibona how they were impacted was different from how abantu basedolophini responded to apartheid. And so I think for me it's also that other perspective, because I see we treat ilali as if nothing happens in smaller towns near Lali, and yet I feel as though idolophu efana njenge Willowvale nelali efana njenge Lurwayizo have become libraries of history, living libraries,
for sure.
But we've discarded them because zisecaleni of major events, major places that we consider history plays from. So I think for me it's also that framing to say that history is living, it's continued eLurwayizo nalapha eWillowvale. Abantu have found ways to come alive again and to make new stories, but there's also these places physically as changing. So in them not changing physically, zikhona ezinye history that become permanent, that we can still visit with. And I think that's what he wants to do with the property. When he said, when he keeps asking me, you know, what did you mean by you want to make the ruins of the property speak? It's in the fact that it's history for me. La foundation ehleli phana, ilali, and where that place is allows for Landawa to become a memorial site. It allows for us to maybe think creatively. How do we make this place become indawo where people come and sit here and they think with the history that's here, and we come up with creative interventions that nurture the history that's here, that will allow for other creatives to say, okay, ukuba Siviwe from uJafta, how about Sihle with the other names as well? And we bring those stories also to the site, or we find ways of bringing those stories to life kwindawo zazo, and maybe it offers the family's ways of grieving and finding conclusions to some of izinto ezingabalekanga. But masingazilibali siphinde silibale abantu abalwela inkululeko yethu, because I think that's essentially
that
where
that
we
is
go.
yeah that is the main thing. That is the main thing. Yeah, so I concur on so many levels nalento ithethayo ngoba abantu baseLurwayizo now are beginning to talk. Here is a unique situation. The cast is appointed by the Department of Arts, regional. The Department of Arts, usamathole. Uthi ke ngoku, the cast must come from Amathole.
Okay.
Because they'll be funded the Department of Arts Amathole. That's understandable. But kuvele kubekho oseGcuwa,
okay,
oseDutsha, oseMonti, njalo. All these different areas. And the only place they can rehearse bonke kulapha eLurwayizo. And the only place that can give them a place to sleep and etc. and food while they're rehearsing kulapha eLurwayizo. So they made the play eLurwayizo. So there were times when director wanted to look at the audience, and he would just gather people nabazothenga pe shop abadlalisi babukele. And some of the scenes would be so like there's one particular scene where they are just saying Chisa. They sing the song. Nansi melo Chisa. And abantu abadala babukeleyo bathi xhungu. And then when the scene dies down, bahambe. Then the stories come up. Baathi umntu hey mna ngalamini bona nje ndamshiya umntana. This one couple ithi umntana wethu ona 2 years asasingazi noba sibaleke naye noba sithini samfaka phansi kwebhedi sabaleka. Now imagine if kwakutshile kulaa rondawo beshiye bona umntana umbuzo uthi nimshiyelani umntana, but nobody lives in the mind of a young couple.
Yeah.
Engayaziyo ipain ye-loss yet ever. Enale bundle yabo is so precious. Abacingayo ukuba uphuma kwethu apha xa sidutshulwa we must have a survivor. Ibe pha phansi kwebhedi. But these stories come up and this story and this old man yena athi yo asayazi ke thina sipha elwandle asayazi ke ngoku direction yobaleke ngoba yicliff ngapha lulwandle. And then if siya towards lamapolice because thina engqondweni yethu iaggressor yayingamapolice. Sasingenayo into yoba uMam noXaba nabantwana bakhe bangaze benza into embi. That is how we valued them kwi-community yethu. So kuthi i-aggressors yayingamapolisa and we thought ngale nkolo banayo lamapolisa uba kwenzeka le nto, they've come to destroy the village. So the stories came up and the stories are going to come up because the play is going back eLurwayizo. How do they speak to le nto kufuneka i-achieve? Iya-reflecta le nto ekuthini ubomi bomntu omnyama bebungekho nje ubomi bomntu omnyama. And yafika le devil. It has created a kind of a survival mode where we do not have enough. So akukho enough up. Akukho enough. And I had to live with Ukeni to understand those details. So the way we are is not addressed if we want to really turn back about the effect that we've had.
Yeah. Yeah.
We definitely like nowhere near. Because when I first saw the play, and the guy had lots of music, and I was saying to myself, I wonder how the audience will. I was worried, but shame people baseGrahamstown nabantu young people. Hayi bayiconveya kakuhle to the audience istory saseLurwayizo. So we had that journey to Grahamstown, and it was a big victory to have even gone and even had, and yeah, spread go Facebook, go ntoni, go status. That was.
I really like what you say about the whole village. Like stories keep coming up, and I think
they keep coming up, and they're most incredible stories.
But I think what you're talking about is maybe why ilali has been such a tender spot for me when I think of where next should we sit as abantu in history or abantu in the arts. Like, we always make township studies a place of learning. There's a conference, and I think to myself, but there's so much more teta about political history, racial history here to tribes, yonke laa nto that you'll find if uhleli nelali. And I think abantu basezilalini abakhe no one talks to them, no one visits with them to say, Uba, what do you have to share? What do you want us to know? What is the story that you think is important for us to remember? There's other elements but there's other stories that people could be telling us that we can learn from to help us move forward, to help us find peace, or to even help abantu ezilalini to find peace. Because like your example of the play, how Lomdu would play uMam ilali to sit and be his audience. I liked how he was kind of like invigorating the idea of a community as Lalini is a critical thinker, and it is a willing audience to arts and what happens can go around it. Ngoba omnye umuntu bengazubacinga yazi bezavele enze ayirehearse axeba iright ahambe.
He's done more than that. Phaya eback kulanda ibinamapitsi ukhona iruweni yevenkile, so uthi andisayithandi le theatre. This is like a backyard theatre, so I have to come back and teach abantwana balapha eLurwayizo to do what we do, and then all you guys have to do is put in lights and have a theatre. So 5-10 kudos for that guy. Yolo.
So I just wanted to make a quick commentary after that first video. In the first video, we are watching uMam Jafta and myself, and this video will become the second video in the episodes that will be published. In the first portion of the video, uMam Jafta does a beautiful job of creating context, but in the use of her words, mindful context. And that is the story that we are dealing with, one that deals with a very tenuous period in South Africa's history of apartheid, but also starts to narrow in on families that not only bred political thinking in their homes with their children through uMam uTatu Jafta Senior, who we will, in future episodes hear of just how fiercely involved they were in politics. Also from Mrs. Jafta's side as well, her own parents too have strong political relations, and there's actually a beautiful fashion story of her dad owning a fashion store and actually being a stylist to some of our political stalwarts. So there are these layers of the familiar, there are layers of caring, of compassion that are embedded in her words there. As she, in Xhosa, we would say, uyasiyala, she is preempting us. She is just giving us these preluding words on how one should arrive for the stories that they will come to hear. And I appreciated just the words that she offered as we enter this passage of listening. And then in the second portion, where the screen blanks a bit, she tells us of a small project that was initiated with a local director. It was a play that was hosted at the Grahamstown Arts Festival this year that actually deals with what happened in Lurwayizo, involving the Jafta family and the then apartheid police, and the events surrounding the 2 days that, you know, things were going down. So what I appreciated there, and I make note of it in the recording, is the fact that as a family, the responsibility and just the creation of space for creative practices to also find place in what they are reinvigorating in the village. So the Jafta home, in particular, their family plot in Lurwayizo, the parents really had created an epicenter for the village of Lurwayizo. The people in Lurwayizo are able to go there not just to buy the odds and ends that are needed, but they had found a support. They had found adoptive parents through the Jaftas and their store. And so, you know, for a play to come to Lurwayizo and to be housed and to be allowed to rehearse, but also for the director to feel a sense of responsibility to then engage with the village and not treat them as mere tropes of what he's presenting, but he invites them to be his audience, to be his critical response to the work that he is doing that is reflective of their personal histories. I found that to be just spot on for the sort of materiality that needs to be present between creative practices and the communities we service, or the communities that we're inspired by. So, you know, we shouldn't just think of our personal stories as musings for our mood boards, but really bring our communities into our processes, to sift, you know, where lies the truth of the stories that are being shared, and you know, where lies the other mishaps that can happen when we maybe critique away from our main audiences, our true audiences. So I really appreciated just these two moments that she presents for us, especially for a second episode. I think they kind of like set intention for the sort of work as well that potentially this podcast can do in extending or amplifying the stories that it will present. So the next video that you'll be watching is of uTatu Jafta. In the video, there are moments where the screen will blank and there's some writing. If you'll just sit in those moments, try to read as much as you can, and be a witness to another accounting of what happened in Lurwayizo.
It's other two men. It's called Mangaliso and Mafu. Now I was already arrested. I was arrested on the 22nd of January. I was taken from Lurwayizo to where they escaped, with the intention to show the police, to identify them. But I don't know how. But taken there to the, so I stayed there the whole day. I was still on the battlefield when I was arrested. I was kept on the battlefield because there's no prison here. Certain policemen there refused to kill me, to participate in that. He said, ulipolisa lokubamba abantu yena, kolopolisa lobambulala abantu. And his unit was very notorious for kwakuthiwa yi-right squad.
Okay.
Yayi-unit apha emapoliseni yayithathwa ngokuba ibikhe yafika yayisota inyakanyaka. Ngoku osota inyakanyaka bafuna ubulala. Hayi wala sota inyakanyaka. Hayi ndilile ipolisa laloo nto. Maqhekeza, when he went to exile, he was already a magistrate. Nguye lo wayekrunekile eqhuqa umlenze. Oh. Oh. Sifikile kwaXhosa. Nditheke i-outpost ziba kwii-hills. Imfazwe i-continuous. Amabhulu indlela yokuhlala kwawo neevenkile zawo apha ezilalini bezine-communication because ibezi-outpost nangona bezi-traders nje kodwa because uyedwa apha i-next shop ekhoyo nantsa ine-road roof. I-next white man iphaya. Elandelayo phaya kusehobeni is where Donald Woods comes from. Woods is the one who went to exile after Steve Biko, who was a journalist at Daily Dispatch. Yes. We are waymenza most of writings as Steve Biko. In those trees there's a white structure there and trees on top of this flat. It's a shop le ekuthiwa kwa Raymond. Ilandela AP shop Habit. Yes. That shop in a communication no Habit in Tsumbakas. That shop in a communication no bowling. Bowling in a communication.
No donuts.
No woods.
No woods.
Okay.
There.
There, kusemendo, on top of lendlu loronda veni, there's a shop esqithe kuyo pha. There is no shop kweza shops zabelungu engena communication nenye. So when I'm saying kuwe imfazwe i-continuous. So apha ke kusekhaya le ndawo ayikuyo amapolisa assemblise kuyo later, right? Kodwa you'll remember I mentioned kuba phaya ke wathi breakdown la moto yaba.
Yes.
Okay. Aba were coming to reinforce apha uzoncedisa thina.
Yes.
Or to rescue whatever they can rescue. Because they had thought lamapolisa afike ahamba. Bangawazi ba asekhona. So befuna bona the first hand information only to find kanti basekhona. Yes. It's on the second day yale mfazwe yethu Ngale mini bafika ngayo bona. Bafika bona on the 22nd.
Yeah.
Imfazwe was on the 21st. Yenze kanjani le mfazwe on the 21st? These are grenades. Bullets. The grenades. Go up there. Come back. There they are. We haven't touched this thing. And there was never bullets. In fact, we are going to see, here is a bullet trying to pierce from that side. Here is a bullet trying to pierce. You will see. And then there was no something there complaint. What happened? Why they had to come here and not tell you? You see, there are plates. Still see them there. Then this one was not less yenzenguku. Good. Was born. And then lege I get pictures on my police yonke. You see the place? Yeah. You see Tongin? You see? You see? You see, the whole stock that was here was destroyed. Because when shopping in 10, so how to attend this? Uyayibuyisa iyavuza.
Yeah.
Nansi enye bullet hole there.
Oh, nansi
Nansi enye ngenhla. So afika ke ngomapolisa. Dilala apha. Apha. Because kwakho ubusela wakukhona ubuqhekezo ngelo xesha. So ndilala apha eshop. So afika ndiqonqoza amapolisa. Ufuna. Yahamba notata. Yes boy. Davu. Kandithi yo angamapolisa.
Uzolanda wena.
Shunam.
Uzolanda wena. Xa usithi kuzothi takes
Kandithi kule festile. Yo nanga amapolisa gijima. Amapolisa gijima nga. So in no time njengoba coverage senzalanto. Therefore, you just don't something. Tabalega will try. Dianga. And then in the Monokai Pumetron is Latin. Kai again. The Thailand. What else is? You kill it now. The answer of him. Jokop, Glumsaf Manabivinkin. In Mamatina, you call back and go. Sauce in take.
I like that you kept him there.
Yes, because he informed us in good time that Kule shop, yes, on the Tesawi Tengis. So be ready for it. So that's how we got to know about the place that is on market. And Waike was invited because unabu relative no mom. Waike was invited but says I was saying about one. And this is the house that was burnt down on that day.
Is there a reason why we never rebuilt here?
Kalogo, what would be the evidence?
For us, who come back to visit and learn.
Yes, you will say kwacha and abantu abatshisayo basaphikana ngoku sibona zanga. So umama ulala kule ndlu. Not that.
Yeah.
Yes. You can see nansa ekwazo mone rooms ze bathroom. Hlale sithi mose toilet. Lento. Ibafu. Isithi ebafu le.
Wow.
Ipassage le. Room yami buntwana le. The kitchen area. That is the chamber.
Sure.
It was for a month, pampa a month. Okay, so Karagis Pamak. So I'm a police to pull up the festival, ma'am. It's a bullet up with headboard. Yon and Japanzayambi. Because it's possible that you could have died. Of Vilegamus, got to Juliana. The Pumla Lane, that's all of my police. Not my dog come and lend you no kind. Such a girl I saw on my police. The Puma getting home, bunch of my police or so. So, Nancy in Sugakai.
This one here, live alone.
Something is a parboy. See against this torso. So, this is a new door. Koto, once you are here, you see the battlefield. Have you noticed anything? So I want to grenades.
No one was supposed to come out alive from this.
Yeah. So, utaka ilandlu leya icream yayingekabikho yabo. So, uthenga ixesha belibele ukudubula apha kulandlu.
Wasithi
Kazotshona. Betshwa behlathini.
walinde. Walinde.
Xa bejika bendikhangela andikho. Amazi noba ndiye ngaphi. Wabe nokhaya etshone apha.
Awuboni itango kwakho but yamazi utshone apha.
Bendimbonile ke etshona. But andikwazi ucommunicate naye. Siyatsho isibhamu. Kukho lo mzi inale moto emhlophe. Okay. In no time pa. Kwasukho amapolisa apha. Kuye lo umfana wakhona onarratayo apha. Ngolwa papa. Nansi ke le ndawo etyala imbotyi. Bathusha kulama. Importance of this place is where we kept our weapons in.
Okay.
So that we must be in a position to come here even if it is at night, any time.
Nizolanda. Kalesis. Is this where your old pathways used to be, or are these new pathways?
Yes, accommodation.
Okay.
But what you will see these 2 trees. Because where you are keeping your weapons, you must be in a position to direct even a person ongazange as I'm director during the day and say, upon pie garden, these are the coordinates. Kukhona imithi emizane. That tree takes a long time to grow. And it's attack is strong. So once you figure out you will take so many steps to the left, you will take so many steps
to
the right, you will take yes. Kodwa lo mntu uzawusebenzisa luzabe ungase right as you get into the forest. I see.
Yeah, into the forest.
Yeah. Yeah, make against descriptions. That was our cross thing. All grain. What a significance good thing. You lose the ball. Now it's a longer time. Who was direct. Uze. Uzofika nangu umthondo. That's right. Ngase right. Izixhobo ke ngoku zizabaphi kodwa ke ngoku awusuka apha ke ngoku uzawuthatha iziteps ezi-6 uthi 1 2 3 4 5 6 so the weapons are supposed to be here. You tick?
Right there. That marks the spot.
Yes, that's marks the spot. And you align yourself with that tree again. Lamzana nanke kodwa ke sowuvile uba nanku uzawusebenzisa. Yes.
Ogqiba uthi move to
okay. Kodwa furthermore on the day in question there is a mark that we put ke 27 ka lemini bisilapha. I left this one then right. This is a mark that we used thina indicator omnye wethu uba ebefikile kule area.
Okay.
Yabo?
Okay.
So when ungaziyo you will see this
as my indicator ke ngoku.
Yabo? Xa ndifika apha ngoku he will know ukhaya yoba uboy ebelapha. Yabo? This is what didn't happen on that day we fight. So when I came here to look for the weapons, ndicinga ukuba naye uye wathi run out of ammunition kwesasibhamu isiphethe because He was carrying one AK-47 enembombolo eziyi-30 negrenade nepistol. So edubula kusuka ngo-5 ekuseni
noko ziphelile by
kuzotsho kuhlwe. So it should have run out of material.
Yeah.
And I had thought ba uzile apha. Kandifika apha, nothing.
Akakaqali noqala ukuza apha.
Kangeza apha ndimbona ngantoni?
Ngalo sign.
This one yanini yange 2 months ago. Right? So xa ifike yome inje. Hey, kudala egqibela uba lapha.
So we are just going to take a short 10-minute break. So we'll be back at 20 past 2, and then we will start with reflections. Ever. Hi guys. So this is the second part of the session. You've got me here sitting with uMam Jafta. We are going to have our reflective session now. During this part of the session, I know the second video was a little bit harder to get, but we will unpack a bit of the themes that have popped up. I've asked two very important human beings for this project to also contribute, great colleagues of mine, Sihle Sogaula, who is an incredible curator and fashion practitioner based in Cape Town at the moment, and Bongani, videographer, also fashion thinker, who is based in Johannesburg. Both of them have produced the podcast with me, as I've said. They both have their own individual practices and projects that I think echo so beautifully to some of the work that the podcast does. And so I've asked them to join today. And then we will open up the Q&A responses to our online room. If you guys have any questions, queries. And yeah, uMam Jafta will then conclude our reflection session for us with any pointers that she has to add at the end. And then once we are done there, depending on time, it will either slip into the sharing council portion or not. But yeah, we will take it like that. So before we start with Sihle, I just want to briefly speak to what happened in the second video. So in the second video, I'd managed to locate some different accounts from the TRC report itself, the second volume that was published, as well as an article from 1987-88 that was published about what had happened in Lurwayizo. So what had happened was that the police at the time were looking for guerrilla activists in the area, and they had then invaded the Jafta property, which is the store that you also see in the video. And so uTatu Jafta, his family, everyone was there. And so he takes us through what had occurred during that night, and a bit of the interviews after as well. He then broadly expands on like what his time was, not just for him, but everybody who was involved at that time. What was that period like for them, trying to find refuge, but also still being a part of the struggle in South Africa and working towards our freedoms as South Africans, the complexities of what that was. So what is quite unique about the Jafta property, or what the Jaftas have decided to do with the property now, and I think it speaks to why I kind of envision Ilali as being a beautiful place for memorializing history in different ways, but not just making history stagnant, but for history to find life through the everyday, is that Jafta are now working to turn a bit of the property into a bit of a heritage site, which would be beautiful. And as uTatu Jafta, as you see in the video, he actually has different groups that go to the property and he walks them through the location, telling them about all the different things that would have happened and how he was navigating that space during those nights. And so the site itself, he himself, as this veteran, becomes teacher. He becomes a custodian of a deep history that not a lot of us know about. And I think to some degree, depending on who his attendees are for these sort of walkabouts, in that moment, he becomes a moment for us to reconcile with the tenuous nature of our history. And so I think to some degree we get revisions of the TRC when he does these walkabouts with different audiences, which I found to be quite poignant when I got there. So in that video, he just gives us a brief walkthrough, and I've also inserted these pieces from the TRC in order to bring in the other voices that were there. We speak to uTatu and who he was supposed to be, and we've inserted his voice in there. It is so complicated to try to tell history when you come from such a complex country. I think we're all trying to do our best to navigate the present. And as different practitioners, we're trying to find ways to insert ourselves into spaces where we feel as if we haven't been able to critique or to stand with those moments in time. And so I think these sort of podcasts, these interventions also done by Sihle and Bongani in their respective ways, help us to find a meeting point with time. And for us to also be able to reflect with some key moments that have happened in our histories. So I am going to ask, before I ask Sihle to step in, there are 3 provocations that I have set up for us today. This is going to be a little bit ghetto because I need to open up my Word doc. So our provocations for today in the room as we were watching the material and also as everybody continues to speak. What is the value in building new archives? Whose voices are we including? And why these stories? So these 3 provocations are always with me as I'm working on this project. And they are shared provocations with my invited guests as well. So I am going to ask Sihle to take it over and respond to us, please, and thank you.
Hello, everybody. Ndiyabulisa nakuwe Mama Jafta. Wow, I don't know where to begin. But I think maybe a good place to start would be to talk about presence in the way that you and I have continuously spoken about presence over the duration of you spending time with this idea. And I want to think about this idea of presence in tandem with an experience that you had as well upon hearing about uLurwayizo and the Battle of Lurwayizo, and kind of rushing online to see what you can get online and not finding very much information there. And kind of how only through being present in space, only through engaging with the people who are from uLurwayizo, are you then able to access that history and that knowledge? And I think that's a good point to kind of bring us back to some of the provocations that you've put into the room. What is the value in building new archives? And I think the thing that I want to be really careful about when we talk about that is to understand that really we're not building anything new. What we're doing is we are encountering stories that have otherwise not been made accessible to the public imagination. because ilali, like yindawo that people don't necessarily consider as being sites of political turmoil and sites of huge historical events. Those are often very much situated in the cities, or they're very much situated in the larger, more grand narratives, you know. And so when I'm watching these episodes and when I'm watching these podcasts, I get two feelings. One thing, I'm like, yo, ngasken big low couch, ngasken big low room, you know, sitting with you guys, being present in this space with you guys. There's something so fundamentally alienating, I think, about kind of like watching through the screen. You know, it feels very much like one of those situations where we should all be in the room together, because that's really how things come up. You know, that's really how things come up when you are present in space. Sorry. But when you are present in space and when you spend time, you know, and this is something that we also talk about a lot, that has appeared even in my own work, is how there's a very particular thing and cadence that you need to become sensitive to when, you know, and this is the only way that we come to know these stories. We are young, and so we don't have access to this history. Our main point of call when we are looking for things is to go online, and online repositories tell a fraction of the history. And so when we are present in space, what we are becoming sensitive to is not just these histories, but it is the way that these histories come up in conversation. You know, it is the way that things eventually, after a while, after spending time, after being present, after umanuncokola nomntu izode iphume into. And so the thing that I'm finding really interesting is how in these podcast episodes you're dealing with that tension, you know, and that sensitivity, because we know you spend time. We know you are always going to uLurwayizo. And to be able to translate time spent visually, but to also be able to translate time spent through the stories that you are weaving into the visual, I think is something, I think it's something that's very special. And what I'm trying to get at, though, is how do we language, you know, what is the language that, and what is the language that we use? What is the visual language that we use? What is the written language that we use? And what is the, and really I'm kind of using language loosely here to refer to a holding device, you know. What are the kind of languages that we use to hold these stories so that they are largely accessible? Isn't it as well as Sihle in this room where we are sensitive and we've been conditioned to be sensitive to a particular kind of language. So xa sikhupha ke ngoku xa silikhupha ibali lakwaLurwayizo, kwaLurwayizo, and then bringing it into, you know, spaces like this so far removed from uLurwayizo. How can we still ensure that it remains ibali lakwaLurwayizo through the language that is used? And I think you do that very well by keeping the stories as they are, because we get the opportunity to hear from the custodians of the stories, you know, and what the podcast becomes is merely a conduit, you know, a wayfinder, and a contribution to an ongoing and evolving archive of information about uLurwayizo. There's so much that I've written down here. Oh my goodness. And now my notes all of a sudden don't make sense.
Of course they're not going to make sense now. But I wanted to actually interject. uMama, before, while we were on our break, she actually asked me quite a great question. Because she's always been concerned about the fashion. But she was like saying when she watched, she could kind of read how I brought the fashion into it. Because it's the obvious fashion. But also she was like, yeah, who's a guy city between Itowa and Lufayizo.
Oh, okay. So basically what I was saying was the fashion in that place in Lufayizo is really captured not in this confrontational way where there is focus on what the women are wearing. Not the same way you see in a runway, but in this kind of setting where people are going about their business. And then from that, you will see how newly wedded brides are dressed, old women are dressed, working women are dressed, in that context. And it's not necessarily what you would to see maybe if you were standing in downtown Joburg and you watch people coming out of their taxis in their different work styles. And you are just capturing as they're walking out and, you know, in their best, fashion for the day. So I asked Sivu, so why Lurwayizo? Why couldn't this be done maybe on her way from Lurwayizo or to Butterworth or to Mthatha in any other village? What's the difference between being there and any other village that has a gathering of people? And she explained it to me. She explained to me that here is something that has a historical context. And here is something that not only covers, you said it doesn't just only covers fashion as in how we know fashion.
Yeah.
But it covers a cultural schooling, to put it.
Yeah.
It gives the person observing a cultural lesson in how people dress.
And Yazi, I was even saying to uMama that with the second portion of stories, what's quite nice now is that we've got a first season where we did try to go to the bare basics of Silmibandoni, Uti Unglendoni, you know, trying to just locate the A point of what is Ikriya, who wears Ikriya, why are we wearing Ikriya, and kind of unpacking a bit of the more simpler ideas around dress or dress items or material culture. And then to now see these fashioned bodies, or these bodies that express a sort of fashion language in an everyday way, in a setting that does have a political layer to it, but also this layer of, like, ilali is a layer all on its own, guys. I actually want to make that a thing. Like, ilali, the rurals, is like, it is like, it really, it's like, it's like, eating oysters. It's just such a different taste. It's such a different experience. It's so delicate that now to have had politics a part of a place that I feel is so delicate, it just makes for such an interesting way of reading the stressed body and what it's doing in this place, Gengo, and how potentially it's changed, where culture has had to adapt. I mean, the longer we'll sit in Lurwayizo, the more we'll come to know if maybe Amamfengu okanye Amambomvana that live there, if they hadn't changed, if the politics of the time didn't disrupt their ways of fashioning themselves. But it's quite lovely that the process of being Kukajane has just unfolded in these small ways, but they're so big as well. Start to zoom out,
And I mean, I think that thing of the fashion being present in not such an overt way is almost very easy to miss. And I think for me, because it's like something that I'm accustomed to visually as well, it's like, in a way, really emphasizes how the everyday and the ordinary can be so easily overlooked as such an important container of history, and also such an important container of the progression of time. Because even though omama banxibe iqhiya, also notice that siskipa sakwa akaJoe unxibe iskipa sakwa akaJoe, but iqhiya still very much dressed in a way representative of the position that she holds in her community. But yeah, it's an important reminder that when we actually speak about ordinary and when we actually speak about the everyday, it will be easy to miss. It's not spectacle, it's not loud, it's just there. This is also the thing then about presence, about being in space, is that you just have to be there to be able to listen into it and to be able to become sensitive to those different things. But okay, la mama iqhiya yakhe injeyana, I wonder. Okay, I mean, and I don't know if there's any significance in this, but in the second clip, kukho uTata that hands uTatu Jafta a hat. And it could be for very practical reasons, but it immediately also made me consider the symbolism of iminqwazi for amadoda as well. So now what maybe is also happening is that we're moving away from just ukuthetha about iqhiya to considering the landscape of ordinary and everyday fashion as a whole within the community. There's a lot that we can say. I think maybe I've gone over my
this is when I'll drag Bongani into the mix. Mr. Dao has played quite a beautiful role as well for me during this project. And it's actually been fun to work with him. Bongani and his research work looks at Davidson, the township at Joburg. And so, I think I'm a bit in like competition with the township Nelali, but also we're complementing each other quite beautifully. Bongani has recently done a workshop with Erica, New Patterns, where they explored the history of Davidson, again, through a fashion lens. So, the fashion wasn't as obvious, and they've brought it to the surface as a spectator, but also a participant of politics. So I quite enjoy then, and maybe it's why then their podcast this time it's doing what it's doing. Inspired definitely even by friends, how he has gone into looking at politics through fashion lens. I think it also opened up something quite regenerative here. So, Mr. Dow, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Just thinking about the provocations, I think I enter the chat through like from the archive sort of point of view, right? Thinking about the relevance and importance and how problematic sort of we've approached that as humanity. Because I mean, on one hand, we have this shorthand approach that sort of reduces things, puts temporalities, histories and things in museums, in spaces often where they don't really have as much care as they need. Just placed to be sort of observed sort of lightly, and most of that also kind of has contributed to the world we are coming from and sort of healing from. Where the likes of Robert Lomea, for instance, lands in Namibia and takes photos of people and then starts casting and dictating sort of who they are and sort of how they behave, and then and that sort of starts the narrative of looking at, speaking about without real understanding of. And what that sort of obviously does is it lands us in a place where Binyavanga, RIP to a good one, speaks about how to write about Africa, all those prophecies, all that casting, that sort of takes away the witnessing agency of the people within the space, the people whose livelihoods are being spoken about, whose cultures are being spoken about, whether that's exhibited in a museum or in a history book, or anywhere, any place or space really that we use to sort of record history, right? Anna Bloom also speaks very profoundly. She's the professor of the history of art at FIT, and she's been looking very deeply into how Native American culture, has been sort of brought into the American imagination, how they spoken about in the academy, how they exhibited, and all these different things. And there's one particular photo of the Yeye Mashida that she brings up in one of the talks, and she speaks about how that photo sort of freezes everything about what was happening in the moment, right? We will never hear from them. We will never really understand who they are, how they think. So our entry into sort of hearing about, learning about those ways of being will be from whoever was observing and whoever took that photo. And that freezes history. And then that's, I think, where ideas like the past isn't like, it's there type, conversations sort of come in, where, nothing really happens continuously and nothing evolves. And those kind of casts sort of live with us, right? And we have all of these projections, we have all of these sort of stereotypical ways of seeing things, of seeing cultures, of seeing people. And now enter the chat Siviwe, right? And Siviwe obviously means that we've been heard. And when I think about Imiphindo kwaXhosa, for me, I think about how the museum, the gallery, the academy for us, or people of color, I'm sort of inserting myself there, positionality.
Yes.
it's not always removed from how people do things and how people exist in the space, like a place, the four walls or a cube, or however really we exhibit information. In some instances, and in this particular instance, for example, it's part of how we make fashion and why we make fashion. It's embodied knowledges, which show that some in indigenous practices, and for the Xhosa people in this instance, for them history is embodied, and it's an extension of language, but also it lives within how the language is constructed, the sayings, the music, and the making of the garments themselves. They all form part of that storytelling that keeps the essence of the people alive. And the essence, being the culture. And as a result, history making, moves in tandem with, the making of fashion as a way of life, to preserve knowledges as a practice, but as well as to obviously, be adorned, to look beautiful, to look amazing, to inhabit space, to move in space, to make sense of space. You think about the fabrics, you think about what they do for the bodies, you think about how people think about what fabrics to use, how to use them. And then deeper than that, you go to the psychological and the spiritual aspects of it, which is some of the things that I sort of get into. But obviously, I'm looking at the township. I'll get into that in a moment. But the practice of how making those garments not only allows us to communicate with the people who we are with, who are around us, and the people that are looking at us from a distance, as well as the people from the great beyond, because some of those garments then form part of rituals, which extend beyond what's happening in the physical, in the now. And how we also think about spirituality, and life beyond what we experience in the physical. And I think the podcast builds on that it's multidisciplinary modes of preserving, it's multidisciplinary modes of seeing, it's multidisciplinary modes of also bringing into the chat people that have not really been thought of as people who could keep knowledge, who could pass down knowledge, who could have a way of knowing, right? Especially where fashion is concerned, because I think there's a lot of academic rhetoric that has moved us from thinking about fashion as what's in fashion and the trends and things like that, and some of the people in the chat have written extensively about that. But this collection of ideas that exist within a village, that exists within this particular community and group of people, how they see themselves, how they see the world, and things like that. That's what I appreciate about the podcast. Further on, what I also appreciate about the podcast is that when Siviwe, you're not speaking to or about the people, rather, but speaking to. So there's history making in the presence, in the form of recording the knowledges that exist within the space through conversation. But when someone looks back at these conversations or revisits these conversations, the people within the environment, the keepers of the knowledge, will have always walked that journey with you, instead of spoken about. And I think that's, for me, that layer is very important, because we visited earlier this year the museum, Muti wa Vatsonga, in Limpopo. And I was fascinated by the kind of technology that existed within that environment and that space. But you can only access that through, the text that's on the posters that were created a long time ago, and some unattended objects that exist around the space, which, that care again, that conversation of care in how we keep these memories and how we archive, knowledges and histories. It's evident there that there's not a lot of care, which is very problematic. But the people that live around that place, a lot of them, through sayings, through music, through fashion, have those knowledges, but they haven't been consulted. And speaking from a person now that values the digital as a way of communicating, but as a way of preserving, I appreciate how then also the podcast audio visually, carries those narratives, into the meta, which is, well, right now is spoken about as the last frontier of, like, communication in the world. And when you look at the meta, also a lot of the symbols that we grew up on, a lot of the ways that guided how knowledge has been passed down, how access has been governed, who gets to know, who gets to preserve, who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, are still sort of part of how we think about artificial intelligence, that recollection, what gets to be recollected when you consult like an artificial intelligence brain. I've created a few of them, and I've kind of given them information just to check how sort of they hallucinate and sort of think and process and sort of speak back to you in a sense. So a lot of that still has bias, because a lot of this information still does not exist, such that people are, like myself, for instance, are able to feed it into the meta. So having a podcast does that. It takes the conversation, it takes the knowledge into the meta to be accessible enough for us to use it as we think about, if we're saying the fourth industrial revolution and the future of humanity is computers, who exists there, who participates there, whose knowledges, are accessible there. And sort of that's one aspect. Or another aspect rather. When I think about then the township, thinking about now erasures, that have happened in the past, ways of preserving knowledge obviously are not unique and sort of people of, in indigenous descent. Many cultures have ways of remembering, of keeping knowledge, information, amongst other things. When I think about the township and how that sort of translates into that world is when you think about the Italian fashion that has come through Don Milano Plaza, that exists at, that used to be at the Carlton Center, which is a very fascinating conversation as well about, that utopian design versus, where the clothes were going and sort of the kind of influence they were having, and how the utopia sort of, contrasts against, the sacrifice zone, which is the township. But in the fashion that was moving from that space to the township, so people could obviously transcend the labels of being a domestic worker, being a farm worker, in the domestic sense, of being a garden boy, all those labels, to disrupt the labels of how people are perceived and seen. I begin to see how, in that instance, it's not about indigeneity, but it's about using the symbols that exist within the environment, which are signifiers, to one, obviously contest, but another to create some form of society. When you think about Pex culture, they obviously use and are adorned mostly by French, Italian designs, but how they use fashion to create languages within that space and societies that begin to undo what how, so how townships obviously were constructed was it's not places where you can live and thrive and sort of have full self-expression and all these different things, right? Because apartheid, obviously, through necropolitics, when we think about necropolitics and think about sort of how we've sort of formed the world in within modernity, coloniality, is that certain spaces obviously are for labor, right? And as a result, then people in spaces like that can't think, can't remember, can't preserve, and also are not really included in a lot of conversations. But when you think about how they started using then the clothes to create literal languages, they have languages. I've been interviewing some of my friends. A lot of that material will start surfacing, and they were able to think about themselves in the space. They were able to remember themselves in a different way that sort of disrupts the ideas and how they've been confined through ideas, how they've been confined through space, and how they've been remembered through history. And then when you double click on history now, this is where Davidson 1520 for me as an Instagram page sort of comes into the picture, where I'm like, when people think about Beck's culture, they always think about the economical aspect of it, of, you know, conspicuous consumption, you know, that economic lens of like wastage and things like that. But not a lot of people really think about the value of using this dressing worldly through this access that was obviously, you know, coming into the township as things were changing and sort of the government and sort of the lay of the land was sort of rethinking itself, to now start constructing other schools. And there's not a lot of academic rhetoric about that, or that delve, you know.
Yeah.
So then Davidson 1520 then double clicks on that. It's what are these knowledges? What are people saying? How is fashion also part of, you know, the spiritual aspects of things? How Mplaselo, for instance, started as a Diki's utility wear for mine workers, well, living and sort of working under very extreme circumstances. How they've integrated uKplasa, which is adding patches that uKplasa obviously is like you're putting so much out there, like peacocking of sorts,
Yeah.
but not obviously like as a way to attract, but as a way to disrupt how the black body that lives within that garment sort of is thought about within that environment. But then how the colors, what is put on the this utility garment now help people sort of think through, but as well as process the effects of the violence of the space, obviously looking for healing, and now bringing the spiritual aspects of how fashion can help us heal. And conversations like that now need to obviously now come into the fore, need to be heard. So for me, I think the podcast in Imiphindo kwaXhosa, and it's a lot of inspiration for me. It inspires me a lot, because it's bringing voices that are relegated. When you think about villages and when you think about those stories academically, there's a lot of relegation. They live at the periphery of the center. You know, we are the ones, you know, if you're going to hear anything new, if you're going to hear anything that has authority, come to the center. The podcast does that. It brings them to some center, or it creates access. I think I like you know, Sihle's actually view on this. Like it focuses, and in one of the texts that you put out, that it starts to unfold what has been folded away, which is something also that I really appreciate. But then also, you know, lastly, you know, the people that haven't been heard, the people that haven't been thought about as knowledge keepers, who we do research, actually, you know, I'm guilty of it as well, learn from, and then argue in white papers and in a lot of spaces, but never necessarily give the credit to say, actually, if you're reviewing and accepting this, it's as a way of knowing. What you're essentially saying is that the mother I was sitting with, that was doing the reading and teaching me this in the intimate, everyday way of doing this and passing this knowledge to me, actually, you know, is the person that we should really talk about and really bring into focus. And I love how then everyone obviously has been brought along the journey. Baviwe, essentially.
Thank you so much, Bongani. I don't know if Sihle is still here in the room. Are you still here?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Before I round us up on you and Bongani, I did want to, there's something Bongani spoke about as he was speaking about new art, about, you know, what it means for us to disrupt the archive and to create space for these stories. I was reminded of House of Lindro and what that archival work has been. I know it's a more personally leaning body of work, but when you invited me to comment on House of Lindro, I remember sending you a voice note just saying how this fashion archive that you have reinvigorated had made me visit with abantu abantungelayo, you know, women and men who have sewn for me, who didn't go to a formal fashion school, but they are fashion teachers in their own way. And so I wanted to maybe just bring that into the room, and acknowledging that body of work, because it's, you know, Bongani is busy saying the podcast inspires his own process, but I'm equally inspired by you and Bongani with your own projects. In particular, your project with your mom's fashion brand and her archive really speaks to a tenderness that is needed when we are dealing with the stories, the recapturing of a story, the interviewing process. You really do such a beautiful job at being tender, being gentle. And those are things that get missed in the process of research. We forget to be human. We forget to show compassion and ease with the work and with those who are coming to contribute into our processes. So I wanted to maybe offer you a bit of that space just to speak on a little bit more about a bit of that. I know you're probably kicking me in your head right now.
No, I mean, I have such a contentious relationship with being an academic.
But I love you for that though, because especially because I'm on the outside. I always feel I'm on the outside looking in at academia, but we always have a back and forth about our positionalities as the people within the space, but we have contention with the space.
Yeah, absolutely.
And our work continue to push at what the space is all about, who gets invited to be a part of this space and who doesn't.
I was actually busy writing a comment in the chat, so I'll just bring that into the conversation. And this is, I was kind of riffing off of something that Bongani had mentioned in his response, that, you know, there's not a lot of discourse on the ways that fashion can be used to be a record of history. There's not a lot of discourse on the ways that fashion can be used as a site of healing, as a site of reparation. And I think maybe he was speaking strictly in the academic sense, and to an extent I agree. But that is when you kind of have to look elsewhere, and that is kind of where you have to decentralize academia, decentralize academia, and also the institutions that it affirms as places and custodians of, you know, the end all and be all of knowledge. Because as he was saying this, I was like, well, actually, if you look at someone like Lucanyo, if you look at someone like Utebe, even going back to Stone Cherry and my mom's own practice as well, if you go and you read their work, you have so much insight into how they've acquired the language of fashion and how they are using the language of fashion to talk about something so much more historically and culturally deeper. And that's really kind of where my contention is. That's where my contention begins, is that bringing those stories into the academic institution, and now for me in the context of a thesis, sometimes can render those stories, those histories fragile because they are not conversant with the modalities that the institution so frequently insists on.
Yeah.
And this is something that I'm finding in my own work as well, is that I'm bringing this tenderness in, and I'm bringing this grief in, and I'm bringing this recovery in, but it's being scrutinized and it's being doubted and it's being questioned, because really that's what we do in academia. We scrutinize, we question, we provoke, we probe. We don't trust very easily, you know. And those stories where they are trusted and true, you know. And we bring them in here. And so I think this is also what I was trying to get at earlier when I mentioned the language that we use to speak about the work that we are doing. And so I really appreciate the fact that you anchor i-podcast kwisiXhosa, kwimiphindo, because what that does is creates a contextual environment for the work. We know that kufuneka siqale kwaXhosa in order for us to be able to understand what it is that is happening kwimiphindo.
Yeah.
It of course is in conversation with the contemporary academic and the contemporary scholar and contemporary scholarship, but what you are doing is an exercise in theory building as well, you know. And so while you are recording embodied histories, while you are recording stories, what you are also doing is creating and establishing and affirming actually a lens through which we must look at the work. Cannot necessarily look at the work through fashion, because it's not really a fashion story. Fashion appears.
Yes.
And we can point out fashion, but it's not necessarily a fashion story.
Yes.
We can engage with it through emerging technologies and theories about audiovisual and even archives, but it's not necessarily that. Kukuphinda.
Yeah.
Yabo. Kufuneka siqale phaa kukuphinda and understand what ukuphinda is. You know, in order for us to hear the story the way it is meant to be heard. Yeah, so this is what I think the real work is creating languages, recording languages through which the work must be read, languages through which the work is carried, because I mean, we know that language in and of itself is an archive. There's an archive of meaning, there's an archive of history, there's an archive of experience. So it is not, it's not just a curatorial gesture.
Yes.
Attach something to isiXhosa. It's much deeper than rap, you know, like it's not just it's not just because because what.
Yeah. But kaloko, it's what uMama did. She in your segment, you say Yibiyele. And I actually made that the title of that episode. Because when you said it, uMbiyele, I sat for a second, I thought to myself, uMbiyele, uTatu uthini uMbiyele? What does it mean to encamp, to surround, to wall, to and those are the different, because Anditi, I moved from uMbiyele in isiXhosa, the word, to then translating it or unpacking it in English. And then I went back to isiXhosa to then settle on uMbiyele, you know, the many other words that could have come from the English understanding of uMbiyele still didn't feel sufficient, you know, to describe exactly.
And so when I went back to your word, Yibiyele, there was something so intentional about that word, so meaningful, so exact. Because as it kept coming back to me, I could see hands coming to build a wall of covering around Elibali. You know, I could see bodies acting as that covering around Elibali. And so uKubiyela just encompassed so much more than what any other word could have given me in that moment. And because it is in that thing of not erasing the co-author's voice as well. You know, it would have been a completely different story, Ma, if maybe I had recorded you, come back and written a paper, and you never hear Mama actually saying, Yibiyele. And it's maybe me trying to locate a more appropriate word that would fit then the white pages again, the audience of white pages. Whereas now I think, you know, Noba, you play that snippet for umdu ezilalini or anywhere else, Xhosa, the language will again, it will again like emphasize the sort of sensibilities and the sort of attitude that is being insisted upon for that moment. So yeah, man, just the value as well of like what this sort of work is doing for us to remember certain elements. And I think I sit in quite a few practitioners beyond just us in this room. I mean, there are some food practitioners as well. Khona umfana waseDikeni uLiphatho who his writing of ukutya, the Xhosa words he's using, they feel so primary, but they capture the essence of his practice. For him, ukutya is simple. It's a simplistic thing. It's not, but it's got a bit of it's got some theatrics to it, but it's a very played down, but very everyday, ordinary. There's something quite beautiful in the simplicity of the word when it sits with the image of his final plating. So, man, and yeah, I think this session really has been quite a nice way to maybe highlight as we spoke about yesterday or day before yesterday, the wide road that we are all beginning to stand on and walk on, to occupy these different. I don't think we're trying to occupy the voids that are there. I think we're just merely here to occupy this road, an established road, or establishing new parts to this wide road. But we are here to occupy this road without someone telling us how to occupy it. It's a very initiated occupation of space and presence.
It's also an invitation. It's also an invitation and an extension to say, here is one semantic proposition from my universe, from my world. Here, take it.
Yes.
Take it as it is and go and seek out the other knowledge holders. You know? Go and seek out the other people who have this in their tongues and maybe wrestle with it a little bit as well. Walk with me on this road, you know. Walk with me on this road, just as I have walked with you on your road. Walk with me on this road. And then we never know how roads converge, roads curve, and they wind and they do their own thing. Thank you, Sissy, for your work. Thank you, Siviwe.
Thank you, Ndombi. Thank you so much for joining me today. Bongani, thank you as well for your contribution today.
And also, sorry, I just want to say thank you, Mama. Thank you, Mama. Thank you, Mama.
I think I'm at that age now where I really want to share with younger people and to kind of show them some things that zisasithele kubo.
Mm.
Yeah. So I'm very privileged to have been part of this journey with uSivu, and I'm trusting that should be embraced by the other practitioners as well, to try and deepen their understanding of what she's trying to say. Yeah.
But then from Pulela Mama as well, I'm reminded in all of this conversation, I'm reminded of our talk about your second wind of life, if I could call it that. Your second wind of life that has you as a woman with an accounting background who lives in a very small town, part of Ilali. You've decided to follow a different path, or a long extended path that you had left dormant for a while, and that is creative writing in the academic space, but your own version of the academic space. And there's Sogaula about how, you in your position can now also act as a vessel through which the stories Zelali and Willowvale can come out again. And so I thought maybe this would be a great moment for you to share a little bit on that, on what it means for you to be positioned where you are, and how you can use this new chapter to extend on the stories that we have to share.
Yes. So a couple of years ago, I went to a reading, not quite a book club, but a writers club. And I decided I wanted to register for a degree in creative writing. And I'm at the tail end of it. And it has been really, for me, something that takes me out of saying, "Oh, now I'm an old woman whose use is to look after grandchildren." So, but it just says to me, you've been privileged to be in a space such as Willowvale, very enriched with a Xhosa culture, and very enriched with stories, and it has been really eye-opening for me. Academically, it's been, I can't actually describe it. It's been some kind of like an outreach of a soul. So I like to call this my sunset career. So I've been writing. Of course, when you go towards academia, you kind of don't perform as you used to. I'll give you an example. Someone could just ask me, "Please, I'm here now. Can you please write a few lines, a poetic something?" And I could do that, but not anymore. Not anymore. I found that last week, the lecturers wanted a poem quickly to recognize the 30 years of democracy at UNISA. And for the life of me, I just thought, no, you can't spring this on me. I'm not like that anymore. So maybe my academic journey has killed something. But I'm just hoping to be able to reconcile and to go back into that kind of thing that I had. I mean, I would be at a bank writing when in the olden days we used to write slips if you wanted to make a withdrawal or a deposit. And then because the queue is so long, I would turn the page over and start writing about the conversations that are happening,
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen much anymore. But learning about the different cultures in the degree, learning about the English literature history, all those different areas that I had, I really am feeling really enriched. And I'm not as shamed as I used to be, because when you speak a lot of English at Willowvale, you kind of given that you given, I would say, a different treatment. Some respect it, some don't care much for it. But I found that the stories there are really enriching. I was asked at UNISA again to contribute some of my short stories, and they put them into a small volume of people who were doing creative writing second year then. And I kind of wrote Conversations with My Father-in-Law. That was my title. And right at just before publishing, they asked us to do readings. And I found myself talking about the first village where I lived, that it was across the Xhosa kingdom where the king lived, and the interaction and then I said to myself, who else lives? Who else is a neighbor to the king?
Thank you. Okay.
And I really was humbled and excited.
Yeah.
And most people, yes, they were really in awe of the kind of man my father-in-law was. But they were also in awe of what kind of village people live with the king, and then they go there and then they say, Abayete kumkani, and then they go about, you know, and that's the flavor I want to bring into my writing. I don't want to tell people about my life in Cape Town or my life when I was an accountant but what I really, really and truly want to do is in every story that I write, people learn something, no matter how small or how big, about the Eastern Cape, our culture, our personhood, our way of doing things. So I've called this my sunset career because I'm just not going to stop, not anytime soon.
I think it has gone very well. So I do want to make just a young thank you to everyone who has attended today. I think, you know, it's not even just about the responsibility of hosting this. For you guys to attend today, you've definitely validated my relationship, my goings to uLurwayizo, my insistence on sharing the stories, and uTatu's insistence on me recording the story. You know, it's been...
Yes, he's very proud.
He's so proud. It's been a two-way street of, you know, not just me wanting to do it, but uTatu, uMam being so keen and so excited, and us hyping each other up this entire time about what we're doing. And so it's really just such a joy to finally present aspects of what's here. There's definitely so many more stories. The other ones, you know, due to time, didn't make it to today, but also I think the ones that have been shared were actually perfect. They were just enough to give an idea of what is there. So yeah, I wanted to just make that very, very big thank you for your attendance, and also to the GFA, to Angela, to everyone. I see Kenya's in the house. Hey, Kenya. Hey, Che. You know, I want to thank the GFA as well for creating the space for all of us. Because yeah, as we've been saying today, there isn't much room that gets naturally made for our stories, for us to be the teller of these stories. There, as Sihle points out, in an academic institution, there's a lot of rigor, there's a lot of scrutinizing as to why those stories and you know, looking for a sense of credibility according to their standards. And so whenever work like this gets heard from, it becomes such a beautiful way of pushing back at those standards, at pushing back at this idea of who gets to quantify and qualify this knowledge as being knowledge. You know, who are you to say yes or no to this and to that voice? And I think, you know, I've got an uncle that I wish he had attended today, but unfortunately he couldn't make it. But he's a professor at UJ, and he always gets excited when I talk to him about this work, because as a man who is a part of the TRC and he has seen different facets of South Africa's history come alight, he once said, you guys aren't making the white man work enough yet. You are not making him uncomfortable enough yet. And I love people like him because, when I then present work like this, to see him light up, to see him get excited about the sort of voices and ideas that come forth, really just emphasizes the impact and the turning of the tide that is what we are collectively. So thank you to everyone here today. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Mama, I don't know if you don't have any more closing words for us.
No, I just want to say thank you again, and that Siv and her colleagues have joined many academics who have made the Battle of Lurwayizo into something that grows. In August, when she was at Lurwayizo, we were hosting students from Virginia, and they are coming to do research, very much like she goes there for her research. They do research on environmental sciences, and one is from public health, and the other one is now I forget, but it's also to do with tourism, with ecotourism in that area, because we are on the Xhosa Nature Reserve. So now we're going to be adding your Fashion Institute as one of people who do research in that area of Lurwayizo. And we're proud, we're happy. We want to impart something to our young people there. So now one of the things that those young people who haven't really found their way or who have fallen through the cracks, we can team with your institution to teach them this craft and to make them feel right about themselves. So I can't thank you enough, and it's our privilege to be sharing the research platform under the banner of Battle of Lurwayizo. Thank you very much.